Hello and welcome to this Australian Limousin Breed Society Breed Advancement webinar on EBVs made simple. I'm Georgia Pugh, Next Gen Agri Limousin Breed Advancement. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and the recording will be made available following this live event. Today's webinar will give you the confidence to truly understand, interpret and apply Limousin EBVs to drive breeding and business success in your cattle breeding operation. You'll learn about the power of genetics, where EBVs come from, how to use them to boost your returns, the data collected to generate them and how they're generated, and what EBV accuracy means for smarter decision making. So that we don't get any interruptions, please make sure you are on mute during my presentation, but feel free to put through your questions in the chat at any time, and I'll try and answer them as I go throughout the presentation. You're more than welcome to turn on your video if you would like. It's always nice to see actual human beings at the end of this internet webinar. You will be given the opportunity to come off mute and put your video on at the end of the presentation, and we can have some discussion and Q&A at the end. Alrighty, let's get into it. So today's webinar, as I've mentioned already, we're going to really hammer why EBV is so important and how they harness the power of genetics. We'll drive drive around and then talk about understanding Limousin EBVs and really drill into that. That's what I was trying to say, so that we all really understand what concepts are actually being used in the calculation of EBVs. Then we'll really understand how to interpret and use EBVs, and we'll go through the specific Limousin EBVs that are available, along with some other EBVs that might be coming in the future. And we'll wrap up with some Q&A and resources. So today's webinar is all about empowering you to power your progress with Limousin EBVs to enhance your breeding strategies and achieve better results. Firstly, it'll help you clearly understand and use EBVs. As I said before, the concepts that are behind EBVs are really rather scientific, so we'll go and spend a bit of time walking you through all the concepts that you need to be aware of so that you can fast track your genetic game. Secondly, we'll focus on building your confidence in selecting the right genetics for your herd and how to use EBVs to do that. Thirdly, with this presentation, you'll see how EBVs can be applied practically. So we're going to go through some actual practical examples to use for yourself at home. By the end of today, you'll feel more confident about using EBVs as a powerful, practical tool to drive progress in your operation. We're also going to go through and have a quick look at how EBVs compare to actual expected results, which is really interesting to see so that we can all feel confident in using them going forward. So why are EBVs so important and how do they help us move forward and improve our genetics as Limousin breeders and commercial producers? There are many factors that come into play leading up to how a cow or bull presents in the paddock or on sale day. Are they born from out of a heifer or a mature cow? Are they born earlier in the season, or are they a later calf where they're exposed to maybe drought or disease? Maybe they were sick when they were younger. These factors can all have an effect on how an animal will present itself out in the paddock or in the sale ring or in the show. Therefore, you cannot determine which bull or female will produce better progeny just by looking at them. So how can we account for these? That's where EBVs and genetics come in, and that's what we're talking about here today. Every Limousin carries 30 pairs of chromosomes, so that's 60 chromosomes in total, and for each pair, one chromosome is passed down from the sire and the other from the dam. And then there's a shuffle of those chromosomes as they're handed down, so that every single animal has a different genetic makeup. In the image you can see on the right, you can see this shuffling of chromosomes example. The first column represents a bull's 2 sets of chromosomes, inherited from the sire are in blue and inherited from the bull's dam are in pink. The other columns depict all the different other possible combinations. There are more than 1 billion possible combinations of these chromosomes pairings for an animal. And that's why when you have a full brother or a full sister, they can be so different, is because the genetic makeup can be so different as a result of all those different chromosomal pairings. And this is where EBVs give us the advantage. They can take all that complexity out of it, all those billions of possible combinations, and simplify into clear, reliable predictions of genetic gain. EBVs show us which animals carry the genes that deliver more growth, muscle, fertility, efficiency, and carcass yield. So while the power of genes creates variation, EBVs give us the power to harness that variation so that we can make faster genetic gains, faster progress, and therefore greater profitability. So profitability in a cattle breeding enterprise is driven by smart selection decisions and effective management that allow desirable traits to be expressed. And this is because how a bull or cow looks, or heifer, and how it performs, so its phenotype, is a combination of the animal's genotype, or so its genes, and the environment in which it has been raised and managed, so the non-genetic factors. So these are things like nutrition, stocking rate, whether it was born earlier in the season or later, all those sorts of things. So, for example, a calf born as a twin or out of a heifer tend to be lighter than single calves born out of a mature cow. This is not because a twin or a heifer's calf has poorer genes for growth, but because they competed for nutrition during the pregnancy up until weaning, so their environment was not as good as a single-born calf, or the heifer was still growing or maturing. So these genes will express themselves to a varying extent depending on those non-genetic environmental factors. So phenotypes can change over time by manipulating the genetics of your herd through your selection decisions, and also managing those non-genetic factors such as feeding and management. But only genes are passed on to the progeny, and that is what we're talking about when we talk about EBVs, the genes. So we've seen how every animal's phenotype, so what we can see and measure, is shaped by both genetics and environment. Now, the next question is, how can we use genetics to consistently improve our herd? That's where genetic gain comes from. So genetic gain starts from having a really clear breeding objective. So what traits do you want to improve? Are they growth, fertility, feed efficiency, carcass quality, or a combination of these? And your breeding objective should guide every decision you make in your selection decisions. So all the way from what bulls you buy, what cows you, and heifers you retain, or what cows you cull. All of these selection decisions should be bringing you back to what your breeding objective is, to make sure that you are making genetic gain. So it's really important to have a plan and stick to it. And this plan should help you in the mid to long term. And it's really important that you revisit that plan every year or two, so that you make sure that you are moving towards that plan and making sure that it's up to date if anything comes and changes in your market that you're servicing. Everyone's got slightly different breeding objectives depending on what their target market is, their climate, their environment, and all of these things add up and affected as well by the environment in which you're operating in. So slightly different selection decisions might need to be factored into the environment that you are managing. At NextGen Agri, we like to suggest that our clients look at these every 6 to 12 months to absolute maximum every 2 years, and really have some goals with your breeding objectives on what traits you want to work on and how you want to improve them year on year. But how do you know if your selection decisions are actually making a difference? So we measure genetic progress using EBVs and selection indexes. So that's what we're talking about here. That's how we know whether we're making our genetic gain, is through those tools. And these allow us to separate the animal's genetic potential from the environmental factors, so that we can really focus on animals that are passing on superior traits. Now, DNA testing today really underpins the accuracy and credibility of Limousin EBVs, and therefore it's really critical for powering genetic gain. And I'll go into a bit more detail about that in a little bit. But if you aren't already across all the different options for how you can DNA test, you can see a quick breakdown here of TSU, so tissue, hair, and semen sampling here. There's different benefits from these different methods, so I definitely encourage you to be across these if you haven't already. You can revisit the slides at a later time so that you can get across all the detail. There are 4 primary applications of DNA in the breeding of Limousin cattle. So that the first is parentage verification, management of genetic conditions, management of qualitative traits like coat color, horn and poll, and use in genetic evaluation, single-step breed plan, which is what I'll really start digging into in this next section. But before I move on to that, I wanted to make sure that we're all across the Limousin DNA testing requirements. So for the Limousin breed, all new sires and cows are required to have a minimum 100K S&P DNA profile. And these need to be done via one of the methods shown in the earlier screen. And you can order your hair collection kits or TSU units from the ALBS office. Make sure you collect those samples correctly according to the method that's required and labeled correctly. You'd be surprised at how many labels get to the lab and are wrong. And make sure that those DNA request forms are sent in, included with the samples and a soft copy as well. Right, in this section, we'll explore what EBVs and the role of breed plan in generating them is. We'll look at how they're calculated, key factors that influence their accuracy, the importance of performance recording in generating EBVs. I'll also provide some results showing how EBVs compare to actual animal performance. We've already looked at what makes up a phenotype and how genetics and environment shape an animal. So, as I've already mentioned before, EBVs help us make more informed selection decisions to improve the traits that matter most because they are a prediction of the animal's genetic merit. So they're giving us the best possible idea of how that animal's progeny will perform. EBVs are an important tool for making these decisions as a result, and they're designed to be used alongside visual assessment as well as with selection indexes, not instead of those things. So all used together, they are powerful tools used together. So EBVs are generated using the animal performance data, plus information from relatives, which we'll go into a bit more in a second. And breed plan also uses pedigree and genomic information. As I've mentioned before, DNA is very important when it comes to genomics, to all of these calculations. And this information can come from stud herds, research programs as well can contribute to this information. EBVs are really cool because they can account for those environmental effects, so factors that influence the phenotype but aren't inherited, which allows animals to be compared on the genes alone, and so the genes that they'll pass on rather than just what they look like today. So why does all of this matter? Using EBVs lets Limousin breeders and commercial cattle producers make more accurate selection decisions, improving genetic progress over time while complementing traditional visual selection. So the Australian Limousin Breed Society uses Breed Plan as its preferred service provider for running its genetic evaluations. So the Breed Plan is operated by the Australian Business Research Institute, or ABRI. Hands down, Breed Plan is the world's most widely used genetic evaluation system for beef cattle. It's used across the world. It's been around for a long time now. It's endorsed by Meat and Livestock Australia. It's constantly evolving and adapting the latest technology to meet the needs of the beef industry. And it's also been proven and validated across numerous trials across the world and for different breeds. Now, in the last few years, Breed Plan has transitioned Limousin to what is called its single-step breed plan system. So this system called single-step breed plan integrates all pedigree, performance, and genomic data into its genetic evaluation system. So if you look at this table here, the conventional breed plan did pedigree information, it did performance information, but it didn't include genomic information. Single-step breed plan includes all of those different things in the calculation. So it's a really exciting step forward for the Limousin breed to have transitioned to the single-step breed plan. So it's exciting because single-step breed plan more accurately describes the relationships between animals to improve EBV predictions. So it improves the accuracy and also the quality of those predictions. As you can see in this diagram on the left, you've got the conventional breed plan. In this version there, 25% of the genes came from each grandparent. So you can see a blanket approach, those genes are coming from the grandparents in equal proportions. With single-step breed plan, you can see how the variation in percentages from each grandparent is calculated, and that's different, which is how it works out in reality. Genes are passed on differently in different proportions. So using that blanket approach was just less accurate. So single-step breed plan uses these genomics to more accurately estimate the proportion of genetics that comes from each grandparent as a result. There are two main benefits from this. So EBVs can be generated from animals that do not have performance data. So animals that might not be in your system yet, or from non-breed plan herds, you can create EBVs for. Young animals that are not old enough to be measured for particular traits, you can generate EBVs as a result of that. For them, traits which are hard or expensive to measure, like net feed intake or methane maybe in the future. Traits only measurable in one sex, and traits only measurable once the animal's dead, like abattoir carcass data, just become a lot more powerful because we can use genomics to enhance the data that is available and translate that into animals that are related to each other using genetics. The other benefit is it increases the accuracy of EBVs generated even when those animals don't have much performance data available. So for a young animal that has its own performance data but no progeny, for example, a sale bull, you can have more accurate EBVs for their calving ease, for example, if you use genomics to power their EBVs for calving ease. Animals in small single contemporary groups, we can get more accurate EBVs for them using single-step genomics as well. So all of this allows Limousin breeders and commercial producers to make more informed selection decisions and at younger ages. So this allows you to speed up the rate of genetic improvement, which is super exciting. So if we can make earlier decisions, we can shorten the generational interval between selection decisions, which increases that rate of genetic gain. So we understand now, I hope, what EBVs are and why they are so important, but how are they actually calculated? And this is using that single-step breed plan evaluation system. The first thing that breed plan looks at when calculating EBVs is pedigree information, and this is something that shouldn't be a surprise to anyone, but it looks at parents, grandparents, progeny, grand-progeny, uncles, aunts, siblings, cousins. All of that is factored in to the calculation of the EBVs. The next thing is performance information, and this is important because it's actually taking those actual data points on weights, calving, fertility, carcass, and some other traits, and using that raw data to power those EBVs. And this data is collected by Limousin breeders and also projects funded by industry and or beef breed societies, and then also research projects. So there's lots of any data that's collected out there that's provided to breed plan will be used to support the generation of those EBVs. Last but not least, genomics, so the DNA information. And as I said, this has only happened in the last couple of years, that genomic information has been utilized as part of that single-step breed plan analysis. And this just requires a minimum number of animals with both DNA and performance data to calculate it. So that minimum is usually met. So it's an exciting time for the Limousin breed that we've transitioned to this single-step breed plan analysis, and we can incorporate all of these different things into the calculation of breed plan EBVs. One thing I would like to highlight here, though, is even though we can use pedigree information and genomics, it doesn't minimize the importance of collecting performance data. So don't feel like you can just stop measuring different traits now that these things are now available. It's going to only improve the accuracy if you collect more performance information, and we'll dig into that a little bit more later. How would we actually compare breed plan EBVs? So only EBVs produced in the same breed plan analysis can be directly compared. For example, EBVs from the Limousin breed plan analysis can be compared, but however, EBVs from the from other breeds cannot cannot be compared. So don't feel like you can go and compare bulls from different breeds that have different breed plan are run using different analyses. The Limousin breed plan analysis occurs monthly. Animal registrations are due by the 1st of the month, and performance data needs to be in by the 11th. So the EBVs are usually become available around the 21st of each month, if you weren't already aware. Breed plan EBVs are available for all of the traits that matter when it comes to profitability. And here's a summary of all the different types of EBVs that are available. And I'll dig into that a little bit more later. But each EBV is reported in the units of measurement that they are made in. So for weight EBVs, they're reported in kilograms, scrotal size EBVs are reported in centimeters, etc. One important thing to note is that there are a number of routine checks that are undertaken as part of the calculation of breed plan EBVs to ensure their credibility. For example, is the performance information for the trait within the expected range? If the weight's too high or for the wrong age stage, then it'll be checked. Is the performance information for an animal significantly different to that of other animals in the group? Like, is it an outlier? Are the animals' ages realistic? Do the traits submitted align with the animal's sex? We don't want to have male traits submitted for females. And is the quality of the genotype, so the DNA information received, adequate? Otherwise, it might be flagged and be needed to be retested. Now, some of you might still be wondering, do EBVs really work? I know there are still some skeptics out there, and I used to be one of them, so that's understandable. In breeding, we are often relying on our experience and what's in front of us, what we can see with our own eyes. So that is understandable. However, EBVs are a powerful tool for seeing what the eye can't see. As I said, they are focusing on the actual genetics behind the animal, not what you can see. Here are the results from a progeny test run by the Brahmins Association, where breed plan EBVs, so that's the same type of EBVs that we use, were compared for size against the observed and expected performance. So here in this table, we could see this is the expected performance column for those different traits. Here's the observed performance column, and this is the difference between what was expected and what was observed in those animals. As you can see, the EBVs consistently provided an accurate prediction of the progeny performance. And similar studies have been conducted across many, many different breeds, not just in Australia, but overseas as well. So really important to be across this so that you feel confident in using EBVs as a tool as part of your breeding program. Now, there are 6 core concepts to be aware of for using EBVs as a tool. These concepts are really fundamental to how EBVs are calculated, so understanding these will help you make better breeding decisions. The first trait, the concept to be across is heritability, so how much of a trait is actually passed from one parent to its offspring. Genetic variation is another important concept, so the differences between animals that allow for that genetic selection and genetic gain to be made. Genetic correlations, so how selecting for one trait can affect other traits. Contemporary groups is another concept. So a contemporary group is a set of animals that have been raised in a similar environment and therefore have equal opportunity to perform, and we'll go into why that's important. Genetic linkage, so the use of common animals to connect different groups of cattle for genetic evaluation. That's a fundamental concept with breed plan, and it's really essential for accurately comparing the genetic merit of animals from different herds or different years. And last but not least, performance recording, which involves accurate measurement of various traits throughout various stages of an animal's life and submitting that data to breed plan. So we'll go into each of these now so that you guys are all full bottle. So if a trait is heritable, it means that trait can be passed on to the progeny. If the heritability of that trait is high, then the expression of that trait will largely be due to genetics, with a smaller proportion or smaller impact from the environment, or those environmental factors I mentioned earlier. If the heritability of a trait is low, then environmental factors will play a larger impact on the expression of that trait. Good management and husbandry, which allow for variation in traits to be expressed, are important to making genetic progress, especially for traits that are lower heritability. So here I've actually got some examples of the heritability of some different traits. So heritability is shown here as percentages of a trait that it's passed from one parent to the offspring. So the percentages you can see here are the percentages that are heritable of those traits. So think of it as the likelihood a trait will be passed on genetically. Low heritability traits like fertility are highly influenced by the environment, so an animal's nutrition, health, how much they're fed. An animal's individual performance isn't a reliable predictor of the offspring's performance in those low heritability traits. Higher heritability traits, or medium to high heritability traits, I should say, like growth and weight, are more strongly influenced by genetics. So an animal's performance is a good indicator of its progeny's likely performance. The higher a trait's heritability, the more accurate its EBVs will also be. So this is why EBVs for traits like growth rate are generally have higher accuracies than those for fertility traits like gestation length. The next core concept is genetic variation. This is important because it's this variation between cattle that allows us to make selection decisions. And I'm speaking about the genetic variation for all the different traits, not just overall or for one trait. There's genetic variation within an animal for all of its different traits and across your herd. So the width of this curve tells us how much variation there is for the trait. And the greater the variation, the easier it is to identify the top animals for breeding and which ones are at the bottom, so which ones to cull. And this is important because it will help you speed up genetic gain. And as I said before, that distribution varies between traits. So selection pressure, this is why this is so crucial. So selection pressure for animals with higher genetic merit for traits, so animals that are up here, you select for those ones. This will allow us to move up the bell curve by using those animals that are higher performers for those traits across other animals that are lower, which is ultimately going to speed up your rate of genetic gain. The next core concept to consider is genetic correlations. So, or how traits are influenced by the same or closely related genes. Generally, it means changing one trait will change the other. So, and that strength of the correlation can vary as well. In some cases, the relationship between traits are favorable. So the traits move in the same direction, which is easy. If you select for one trait and it's correlated to another trait, and that's going to be moving in the favorable direction, that's wonderful. Happy days. Some examples of those favorable relationships include 200-day weight and 400-day weight. So these two are positively correlated. So generally, as 200-day weight increases, 400-day weight also increases. Rib fat and rump fat depth, these are also positively correlated. So as you increase one, that'll increase the other. Another interesting one is scrotal size and days to calving. These two traits are negatively but favorably correlated. So generally, as scrotal size increases, days to calving decreases, becoming shorter, which is why it's favorable, because that's a good thing. Some relationships between traits are unfavorable, are antagonistic, and selection pressure on one trait will cause the second trait to move in an unfavorable direction. Some examples of these unfavorable correlations are 200-day weight and birth weight. These traits are positively correlated. So as 200-day weight increases, birth weight can also increase, which is not necessarily a good thing. It can be a bad thing. 600-day weight and mature cow weight, these are traits that are positively correlated in an unfavorable direction. So Generally, as 600-day weight increases, mature cow weight also increases, which can reduce her efficiency. Retail beef yield and intramuscular fat, these two traits are negatively correlated. So generally, as retail beef yield increases, IMF or intramuscular fat decreases. Conversely, as retail beef yield decreases, IMF increases. Some cattle don't follow the expected trends, and this is really interesting. So that there are animals out there that are referred to as curve benders. So these are the ones to look out for that are you've got to keep an eye on them. They're going to screw things up a little bit for you if they're not moving in the right direction. So there are animals out there that go against these trends, but yeah, generally speaking, correlations are a really important tool to be aware of because they really power how these EBVs are calculated. So although you can improve a trait indirectly by focusing on a correlated trait, you will have faster genetic gain, faster progress if you focus directly on the trait you are interested in rather than just relying on that correlation. So this is a lot to digest in this figure. I'll bear with me. So this figure shows on the diagonal, it's got the genetic correlations I've just spoken about between different traits. And within the different color codes, it shows you the correlations or the relationships between traits, the genetic correlations. So this figure shows us that genetic correlations tend to be moderate to weak. So there's a much higher proportion of gray, blue, light pink in this chart than there are of the yellow and orange, which are the higher correlated traits. So here you can see that the only strong relationships are really the weight gain ones. So the ones up here, and also rib fat and P8 fat, which I mentioned just before. While carcass weight, for example, is moderately heritable, there is potential for genetic improvement. There are other factors that aren't correlated to that. So it's really important to be mindful of this so that you're not focusing on traits that aren't moving in the same direction. So as I said before, very important to make sure that you consider which traits you want to improve, focus on those directly, and make sure you get data and information to support those choices. I don't want to confuse anyone a bit too much with this diagram, but I do encourage you, if you're interested, to come back and have a closer look at it if you're interested. But this is the information that BreedPlan uses in the calculation of its EBVs. So really important to be aware of. There's a lot of science, a lot of data, a lot of modeling that goes into the calculation of these EBVs. So super interesting to be aware of that fact. All right, contemporary groups is another core concept that we need to discuss. A contemporary group is a set of animals that have been raised together under the same management. So it gives them equal opportunity to perform. By comparing animals within these groups, BreedPlan can tell if differences in performance are due to genetics, not the environment, which is really interesting. So with a contemporary group, the more progeny in it, the better. A minimum of 2 for sure. At least 2 sires need to be used for a meaningful comparison. Animals are only compared to the being in the same calving year. And management really matters when it comes to contemporary groups, which is why breeders need to notify BreedPlan of animals in the same groups when they submit their data to BreedPlan. Contemporary groups are the foundation of genetic evaluation because they allow for accurate sire comparisons and they provide the data for genetic linkage. What is genetic linkage, you might ask? So BreedPlan uses genetic linkage to compare EBVs of animals across different contemporary groups within both the herd and across herds and across countries even. Genetic linkage is achieved by use of common sires. So in this example here, you can see the pink sire, his name Admiral in this case. He's being used in 3 different contemporary groups with different sires used in each of those contemporary groups. So this AI sire called Admirable allows us to link the performance of those animals within those different contemporary groups. His progeny form the benchmark. So in this example, the progeny of the Admiral link sire, they have, this is a chart showing 400-day weights. So the first one has, one of roughly 290. The other one's a lot higher, about 390. And the one in this contemporary group 3 is more around 300 in their respective contemporary groups. In comparison, the average adjusted 400-day weights of the progeny in the other ones, so site A looking at 300, site B more like 380, and site C 320. For the purpose of this example, we assume that the sires are joined to cows of equal merit, just so that we can understand the impact of genetic linkage. This figure here shows how breed plan can account for the differences in the environmental conditions from those 3 different contemporary groups. So this chart shows the difference in weight between those different sires using the common linkage sire. So the differences in average weights compared to the progeny of Admiral are here. So as you can see, sire A, he outperformed the Admiral progeny by 10 kilos, and sire C, he outperformed the Admiral progeny by 20, which is the bull up here, who is the superior performer here across those different contemporary groups for 400-day weight. The resulting EBVs for these are shown in the table below. And as I said before, this is assuming the dams are of equal genetic merit. So a super simple example just to see the power of genetic linkage. The final core concept before we dig into the specific EBVs is performance recording. This might seem like the most obvious concept. However, there is always room for improvement across any Limousin breeding program. So to create genetic improvement, we must record good performance data. Rubbish data in will result in rubbish EBVs. The diagram provides an overview of all the different performance data that can be collected and submitted to breed plan, and the life stage of the animal when it can be collected. And Limousin breeders are encouraged to record as many traits as they can to improve their what we call completeness of reporting scores. So this is a report, or the completeness of reporting score is a report that's available on ILR online under reports. And you can see here in that report how well you score with your completeness of performance score. So a gold star herd is the benchmark. I encourage you to check that out if you haven't already, because a completeness of performance star provides other breeders or commercial producers with an assessment of how much data you collect and submit to breed plan, which can be pretty important to some bull buyers out there who are looking for the EBVs for animals within their herd. You don't have to record every single trait to receive an EBV. If you used to record the trait, or you are recording traits that are correlated, then breed plan will reward you with a breeding value, but that doesn't make it super reliable. So I do encourage you to record as much data as you can and submit that to improve the accuracy of your EBVs. So for example, if you record 200-day weight, then you will automatically get a 400-day, 600-day and mature cow weight, but the accuracy will be so much higher if you submitted data for those traits too. So to make improvements in your completeness of performance scores, to get a full breakdown of this chart, I encourage you to check it out on the breed plan website or on the Limousin locker. Okay, so we've been through all the science and the core concepts to be aware of with EBVs. Next, we'll focus on actually interpreting and using breed plan EBVs. Then we'll take a closer look at the specific Limousin EBVs available and how to use them. So how do you actually interpret breed plan EBVs? And this is really important because this is the area where mistakes can be made, which can really cost breeding programs. So EBVs are compared to the current population, as I've said before, and hammered that home, I hope. So the first step is to compare it to the breed average, and that's usually shown in the table where the EBV is provided, and I'll go through an example of that in a moment. Secondly, you can compare that animal's EBV against the percentile bands, which allows you to exactly identify how they rank within the current population for that trait. And I'll go through some examples of how that can be done. And once you've done that, you can compare the expected difference in progeny performance. And this is probably where the most errors can be made. So it's super important to get this right when comparing animals. So I'd like everyone to remember that the expected difference between progeny is half the difference in EBVs of sires, because half comes from the sire and half comes from the dam. So we always divide the difference by half, and I'll show you how that's done in a moment. Finally, considering EBV accuracy as well as doing all these other things. So this provides a measure of stability of the EBV, which also gives us an indication of the amount of information that's been used to calculate the EBV. So the higher the accuracy, the less likelihood it is to change with additional information. And we'll look at a couple of examples of that now. So here we have an example bull to highlight how to compare to the current population. Hopefully you all find this pretty straightforward. So for this bull, EBVs for him, the ones I've circled in particular, look very favourable compared to the breed average, which is down here in the bottom row of this table. But how does it actually look specifically compared to that year's average? So here we've got where the animal sits compared to the breed average using the percentile table. This lets us pinpoint that exactly, and for that 400 kilo trait, he was super good at that and looked really good. And here you can see that that actually works out to be in the top 5 percentile. So he's in the top 5% of animals in that year drop. But for milk, he was more like the, on average, 50th percentile for that drop. Here is another example shown a little bit more easily in this table format versus the version that you can see on ILR online. This bull here ranks in the top 1% for calving ease. So the green one's here. This is EBV and this is the percentile table beneath. This will make him easier calving than most when he's joined to heifers when they're 2 years of age. So his calving ease EBV direct is in the top 1%. He will also have calves that are heavier than average. So his 400-day weight is in the top 10th percentile, so in the top 10%. His milk EBV puts him in the 50th percentile down here. So he's expected to have average milk because it's his progeny. He will produce progeny that have heavier carcass weight. So look, he's up in the top 1% for that trait. And he'll have progeny who have intramuscular fat in the lowest 90th percentile, lowest 90% of that year group. Some might prefer to use this, instead of those tables, use this EBV percentile graph tool instead of the table. So this just packages up exactly the same information more in a slightly more visually appealing way. So here that milk value is shown here, that, as you can see, transcribes to about 50% for that trait. And here's his 400-day weight one, which we can see is in the top 5% in this table. Sorry, this graph. Now, how do we calculate and compare expected progeny differences? Here we have two bulls. One bull here, he's got plus 53 for his 400-day growth. That puts him in the top 5% for 2023 born Limousin calves. And this other bull over here, he was in the bottom 5%, so in the 95th percentile at 25. So the difference between these two bulls is 28 kilos. All other things being equal, if we divide that difference in half, his progeny, the black bull over here, are expected to be 14 kilos heavier than that other bull. So it's super simple calculation, but one that's important to get correct so that we can put EBVs into actual figures that make sense when we're assessing animals using EBVs. And that 28 kilo difference, as I said earlier, is halved because half the genetics come from the site and half from the dam. An important step when making selection decisions using EBVs is accuracy, of course. So accuracy, this diagram shows us all the different measures of accuracy or bands of accuracy that we need to consider. So what the accuracy figure does, it actually produces an indication of the amount of information that's been used in the calculation of that EBV. So the higher the accuracy, the more likely the EBV is to predict the true genetic merit of that animal, and also the lower likelihood it is of changing as more information becomes available. So less than 50% accuracy, so down here in this range, they will have very little information to base on those EBVs. And these EBVs should change substantially as more direct performance information becomes available. In the 50 to 74% band, that's more medium accuracy band, and EBVs in this range will usually have been calculated based on an animal's own performance and some limited pedigree information. Animals in the 75% to 90% accuracy band are of medium to high accuracy. EBVs in this range will usually have been calculated based on their own performance data along with some of their progeny. And then higher than 90%, these are the higher accuracy estimates of an animal's true breeding value. And it's unlikely that those EBV values will change significantly with more information. Now let's add that EBV accuracy information for the same example bull we just looked at. Here's the accuracy row here. Before we compare this, when you assess EBVs for any animal, you can actually view what traits were analysed under the EBV table on the ILR online animal inquiry search function on the Limousin website. So make sure you have a look so you can see for this bull, traits analysed were calving ease, birth weight, 200 docility and genomics. So super interesting, and it helps explain the accuracy, helps you explain the accuracy levels. So for this bull, lower accuracy traits were calving ease. As you can see, that's less than 50%. Carcass weight, also less than 50% along with IMF. Medium accuracy for milk, and medium to high accuracy, that 400-day weight. So super simple, but certainly something that an important step to follow when you're comparing and selecting using EBVs. Before I move on though, as a rule of thumb, we certainly suggest that animals are compared regardless of the accuracy of their EBVs. However, where two animals have similar EBVs, the one with the higher accuracy is a safer choice. So think of it as like a risk sort of assessment or the ability to sort of understand what's the safest bet and what's also an okay bet, but not maybe as safe, all other things being equal. So we've looked at comparing and interpreting and assessing with accuracy. So let's actually dig into the specific Limousin EBVs. And this is the final section we'll cover today. Firstly, fertility calving EBVs. So as we all know, getting a live calf on the ground is essential. So the calving ease direct EBV has been associated with the ability of a sire calves to be born unassisted from 2-year-old heifers. So this is based on the percentage of unassisted calving. So a more positive calving ease direct EBV equals a live calf on the ground, easier calving and less risk or injuries. And this is the daughters one here, calving ease daughters. So same thing, but for the bull's daughters. So the likelihood they will calve unassisted. This is also recorded as percentage. So a more positive calving ease daughters equals easier calving daughters of that sire. Scrotal size. Increased scrotal circumference has been associated with increased semen production in bulls and also determines the age of puberty in the bull's progeny. And this is measured in centimetres and is used to compare animals at the same age. A more positive scrotal EBV equals more semen, earlier puberty and shorter days to calving. Gestation length is another important indicator of both fertility and calving ease. So make sure you factor this one in as well, not just the calving ease EBVs. A shorter gestation length equals calves that are born with a shorter gestation length, which usually results in improved calving ease with being a smaller calf. A better ability to return to estrus as well, so that cow getting or heifer getting back in calf faster, which is super important. And also potentially a high growth due to having more days of growth between birth and weaning. Days to calving is another EBV that breed plan calculates, but it's not currently available for Limousin. The days to calving EBV is also expressed in days, and it's just the number of days between when the bull was first introduced to the cow and up until when the calf is born. And a shorter or lower days to calving equals a live calf on the ground earlier in the season and earlier puberty in daughters. Weight EBVs. So birth weight, pretty self-explanatory. It's based on the birth of the calf in kilos. It's one of the most contributing factors to calving difficulty. So smaller or more moderate birth weights are essential for heifers. With lower birth weight animals potentially can have lower growth potential. So make sure that you look at the growth EBVs, not just the birth weight when you're assessing animals based on their EBVs. A heavier birth weight equals a heavier calf, and maybe more growth potential, but potentially more chance of calving difficulty. Make sure you also consider calving ease with birth weights as well, just to make sure that the birth weight is not being skewed by, and if you've got higher calving ease capacity, you can definitely get away with a slightly bigger birth weight. The milk EBV estimates the ability of the cow to contribute it to 200-day growth based on their milking capability. A more positive milk EBV means cows with more milk and heavier calves at weaning. I'm not going to go into the 200-day, 400-day, 600-day ones in too much detail, but you can definitely come back and look at that later if you need to. Mature cow weight is something I'd like to spend a bit of time on, because it's not necessarily something that's measured that much in the Limousin breed. So the mature cow weight estimates the genetic difference between animals at 5 years of age, and it's based on the recording of the cow's weights as their calves are weighed for their 200-day weight. So definitely we should recommend that you measure your cow's weights at that period of time when you're weighing your calves at 200 days. Just so that we can collect more of that data and submit it to contribute to more accurate EBVs as a breed. And this is an important one because the mature cow weight EBVs gives an indication of the potential maintenance feed requirements of an animal. So a heavier cow will likely need more food to maintain her, whereas a lighter cow will have less feed maintenance requirements and will have a smaller mature size. And the size of cow as depends on your environment and your target market. But generally speaking, across the board, the Limousin breed average mature cow size has increased significantly in the last 20 years. So I encourage you to make sure that you consider this with your breeding program to make sure you're optimizing your maternal efficiency going forward. Carcass EBVs are shown on this slide. So generally speaking, higher or more positive EBVs is better for EMA, carcass weight, and retail beef yield EBVs. Intramuscular fat. Intramuscular fat, higher, more positive is better as well. Fat depth and rib and P8 fat can be better or worse depending on your target market and whether you're crossbreeding your Limousin or not. So it's something to consider individually. Another trait that is available in breed plan but is not currently available for Limousin is shear force. So the tenderness of that meat if you cut into it. So for shear force, a lower or more negative EBV is more favorable. So one important thing to note with carcass EBVs is that they're really difficult to get data on. So breeders are really encouraged to chase up any abattoir carcass data for their cattle or your clients' cattle from your bull clients, and try and get that data and provide that data to breed plan where possible. There are some other EBVs. I'd just like everyone to note docility EBVs is obviously have been a really important EBV for the Limousin Society and is still available if anyone would like to measure and monitor that trait. Flight time is another one. So that's the amount of time it takes an animal to leave a crush across a 2 meter distance. That's another EBV that's available, and you can collect data and submit that to breed plan. And it might become available in the future for Limousin. Structural soundness as well is another one that breed plan has, but isn't yet available for Limousin due to low numbers. So again, if you're interested in improving your structural soundness, I encourage you to look into those, measuring that data and submitting that information to breed plan so that we can get genetic improvement in those traits going forward. Net feed intake and is also an EBV that is available in breed plan. Again, it's not currently available for Limousin, but that doesn't mean it shouldn't be. So I really encourage you, if you participate in a gate to plate competition or a carcass competition that's also been involved feeding the animals using a feed intake system at a feedlot, then I really encourage you to chase up that data or look for opportunities to collect net feed intake data and submit that data to breed plan where possible. For these hard to measure traits and the carcass traits one that I just showed you, the ALBS is continually exploring opportunities to conduct progeny trials and also opportunities to be part of research projects to collect more of this data to support the breed going forward. But where possible, I definitely encourage breeders to collect what data they can. Okay, so we're super close to the end, so bear with me as I wrap up in the next few slides. Super important to remember that EBVs must be used together with visual assessment and Limousin selection indexes, not in isolation. So certainly not advocating for you to use EBVs only from now on. They are a great genetic tool to help you speed up genetic gain. So certainly start using them if you haven't already. Other traits to consider, of course, are visual assessment, structural soundness, temperament, and bull fertility, of course. Now, the way EBVs are displayed is an interesting one because they can look a bit different in different bull breeders' catalogues, sale catalogues, but this is how they're displayed on ILR online when you go into the ALBS website and search for an animal. You can see that EBVs are all here with those acronyms. Selection indexes are here, and then there's a docility EBV right at the end there. And they, even if they look a bit different, they've always got the EBV, the accuracy, and the breed average will either be beneath those other items like this, or they might be on a separate page in the catalogue. So make sure you look for it if it's not easily found. That'll be somewhere within the catalogue, or you can search for it in the ILR online. Now, just wrapping things up before we go to some Q&A. If you haven't already, make sure you jump onto the Limousin locker to make sure you actually check out all this information. There's lots of different resources on there, and you can definitely, ooh, there we go, that should start playing now. Yeah, there's actually been a new module added recently for webinars and podcast episodes. So there's now 6 modules on there, so you can go on there and look through and look for all this information. There's an understanding EBVs and selection indexes module 1. So definitely encourage you to check that out if you haven't already. The next places to look for more information, as I said, the Limousin locker, there's a QR code there to take you to that if you'd like. And then also using and understanding breed plan EBVs is another resource that breed plan have provided loads and loads of content for. So I encourage you to check all that out if you haven't. Upcoming breed advancement initiatives. So if you haven't heard it, here it is again. There's a new Limousin promotional video and associated marketing material currently in development. and will be available, or some of it will become available by the end of the year. The breed advancement webinar series continues. So we've focused today on genetics and EBVs. Next time we'll dig into Limousin selection indexes, and we'll also have another webinar close out the year and the series of webinars on breeding Limousin for profit. So make sure you stay tuned for the dates when they're announced for those webinars. There's also another webinar that's been done called the Limousin Advantage, and that recording is available on YouTube. So please check that out, and it's also on the Limousin Locker too. And we're also working on a podcast series, so keep an eye out for that and get your teeth into it when that's released in not too distant future. Now, that's all from me, bang on an hour of presentation time. Thank you very much for everyone's attention, and if you'd like to have a chat and ask questions, please come off mute and we can hang around. Thank you.